Welcome back to another episode of the Funding Blueprint. Our guest today is Adam Derry, a distinguished startup and VC lawyer at Silicon Legal, with extensive experience representing both emerging and well-established companies throughout their entire life cycle. Adam has worked with some of the biggest names in the industry, including Facebook, Amazon, Dropbox, WhatsApp, Sequoia, Andreessen Horowitz, and numerous other startups and investors. Adam's expertise spans a wide range of legal matters, from corporate formation and structuring to governance, debt and equity financings, M&A transactions, and day-to-day corporate affairs. His impressive background includes serving as general counsel at Alpha Foods, a plant-based food company, and as a senior associate at Fenwick & West LLP. Adam holds a JD from Harvard Law School, and he earned his BCom and BSc in computer science from the University of Calgary. When he's not providing top-notch legal counsel, Adam enjoys coaching his kids, sporting team, and participating in various sports himself, with pickleball, running, and hockey at the top of his list. Join as we dive into Adam's wealth of knowledge and experience, exploring the intricacies of startup law, venture capital, and the ever-evolving tech landscape. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Abraham. That's a super kind introduction.
Of course, it's our pleasure. I want to dive in, and I want to start talking to you about really entity entanglement. The foundation of any startup is its legal structure, right? And this is the framework that determines how your business operates, how it manages its finances, and protects its personal assets. Now, there are really three primary options for startups. Majority: sole proprietorship, LLC, and C Corp. Each has its own strengths and weaknesses, and the ideal choice really depends on your specific goals and circumstances. So the question is, when it comes to legal structure, which option best aligns with a founder's vision for their startup?
Sure, yeah. So you're kind of taking me back to first day of corporate law here, and it's kind of been thinking about this issue, and I think you've identified the three. There's variations of different types of entities, but you've identified the three kind of main buckets with the sole proprietorship, an LLC, and a C corporation. And the way I think about it, and there's more nuance in this, but there's kind of two variables at play, and those three different types of entities are the different variations of those variables. And so I think the first variable is what I'd call limited liability. And the idea there is that for certain types of entities, liability is limited for the owners up to the amount they put into the company. So in other words, they can't. So if I put some money into a business and I set it up as an entity that's a limited liability entity, that means only the amount I invest into the business is at risk. Things I have in my own bank account, my house, my personal assets wouldn't be at risk. And the other variable to think about is how that entity is taxed. And so there's something called either flow-through taxation or double taxation. So when you think about a sole proprietorship, which is kind of your most basic form of business, that does not have limited liability. That means if you're operating that type of business, your personal assets are at risk, and it does have flow-through taxation. So that means any profits that the company earns, those are taxable profits. Those taxes would flow through to your personal taxes. The entity itself or the business itself wouldn't be taxed on those profits. You would as an individual. With an LLC, it does have limited liability. So that means, like I said, only the amount you put into the business as an owner would be at risk, and it does have flow-through taxation. So again, similar to a sole proprietorship, any profits that business have flow through to your personal taxes. That the business itself doesn't pay taxes. And then the third type of business, the one that I'm most familiar with dealing with, is what's called a C corporation. So that does have limited liability. So again, you're protected. Your personal assets are shielded from liability, and it does not have flow-through taxation. So that means the corporation itself files taxes and pays its own taxes if it has taxable profits, and any personal taxes are your own personal taxes. If you're paid a dividend out of the corporation, that would be taxed personally, but the actual profits of the corporation don't get taxed to you as a person or as an owner. As far as choosing which type of entity is appropriate for you, in my world, in the world I work in, I represent companies that are looking to get backed by venture capital investors. And so in that case, they pretty much always want you to be a C corporation. There's a number of reasons for that. But one of the biggest reasons is investors don't like flow through taxation, and a lot of investors actually like the way their investment entity is structured is they're actually forbidden from investing in flow through taxation entities. And part of that is they just don't want to deal with the filing those types of taxes. They want a kind of one-time taxable event when the company has a liquidity event. They don't want to be dealing with taxes on an ongoing basis as the company earns profits. But if you're kind of just setting up like a family business or what we call like a bootstrap business or a cash flow business, you might want to go with something like an LLC or sole proprietorship.
Great points. I mean, to your point, like you mentioned, dealing with accelerator incubators or angels or VC firms, and any type outside source funding, I think C Corp is really the best option. But let's take it a step further. Let's talk about location, right? In real estate, there's this famous term. It's called location, 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 right? It's this phrase. It's always said. But let's see how that can kind of apply to a C Corp, because many C Corps actually are formed in Delaware, and there's a reason behind that. But I want to kind of get deep into that for a second. So launching a startup is like really building a rocket if you think about it, right? You need the right fuel and the perfect launch pad to kind of achieve escape velocity. So while incorporating in your home state might seem like the natural choice, it's not always the optimal one. Just like some launch pads offer better access to specific orbits, different state jurisdictions can offer advantages for startups. So the question is, should you blast off from your familiar home state, or are other legal launch pads that could propel your startup to greater heights? Are they the ones that are preferable?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it with Delaware. Generally, if you're looking to take money, if you're a startup and you're looking to raise money from VCs, they're going to want you to be a Delaware C Corp in 99% of cases. And I mean, there's a few reasons for that. Probably the biggest one is just familiarity with the Delaware law. Delaware is a well-oiled machine in dealing with corporations, and they've got a well-established set of rules and laws, and they've got a really well-functioning court system for kind of determining or, for addressing disputes and that type of thing. So people are just comfortable investing in Delaware corporations because they know what they're getting, versus if you're investing in a Hawaiian corporation or a Wyoming-based corporation. It's just those may be fine places to incorporate, but people are just less familiar, and so there's more uncertainty. And investors deal with enough uncertainty with respect to whether a business can execute or not, so they want to limit uncertainty in other areas, and this is one area where they can limit that. One thing to add to that, if you're not looking to raise from VCs, you're again looking to form like a family business or a bootstrap business or a cash flow type business, totally fine to incorporate in your own state, and your local corporate lawyer probably knows more about doing that as well. So there are circumstances where it absolutely makes sense to do that, but not in the world of VC-backed startups.
For sure. Yeah. No, great points. Let's talk about founders for a second, because after all, they're the heart and the soul of a startup. But when it comes to ownership, right, how do you ensure that everyone gets a slice of that pie that reflects upon their contribution, both past and future? This can feel like a high stakes negotiation, a founder's feast or famine situation, if you will. But there's no one size fits all answer. But there are effective strategies to consider. So the question is really, how do you determine a fair and sustainable ownership split among co-founders?
Yeah, that's another good question, and there's not. Although I'll probably give you an easy answer in a minute, there's not an easy answer to this. There's whole books on this topic. It's a complicated topic. I've talked to a few different founders and people at different events, and they've talked to me. There's this book that's been going around called Slicing the Pie. You may or may not have heard of it, but it's the idea is kind of you take a bunch of factors, kind of how much money someone's putting in, how much experience they have, how much effort they're going to put into the business, how much time they have, and you kind of try to weigh those against each other, and then you but you adjust ownership interest over time. And I think it's an interesting idea, and I have not, in practice, I've never seen it actually in place in a venture-backed startup. So if you want to try, I'm sure there are some. I've not run into it in the kind of hundreds of startups I've come across. But again, if you're trying to do a more bootstrap business, it might be more appropriate. And I think even the authors of that book advocated more in that situation. I haven't read the book, but I've talked to some folks about it. If you're doing a venture-backed startup, my view is like unless there's a big discrepancy in how much a founder brings to the table as far as maybe it's experience, maybe one founder has like started 3 companies already and the other person's like straight out of college, or maybe one person can only work half time, the other person's going to be devoting 80 hours a week to the startup. Unless you're in a situation like that where there's just a very significant discrepancy, I'm always a big fan of just splitting it equally. Like if you got 2 founders, 50-50, or if you got 3, a third each. I think that generally just sets the company up and sets the founders up to kind of feel like equal partners in a business. And it doesn't always flush out that way, and maybe there are good reasons to split it a little differently. But I think generally trying to keep it as equal as possible ends up with good results in a lot of circumstances.
Maybe more to on that. I want to shift our focus to talk about hiring and firing for a second when it comes to working with team members. Let's go back to the say the rocket ship analogy that we used earlier. It needs the right crew. Besides the right fuel source and the right velocity, it needs the right crew ultimately to navigate the journey. So hiring talented individuals is vital, but it's not always a smooth sailing. Attracting top talent requires a strategic approach, and sometimes even the most well-planned missions require course corrections, which in essence mean more difficult conversations about letting someone go. So the question is, how can you build a stellar team for your startup?
Sure, another good question. Just something that's related to this, but also related to the question we just talked about around founders is vesting is important on ownership. Particularly with founders. So on the topic of founders contributing equally and that type of thing, I always suggest a full 4-year vest on founder shares. And in part, that's a way to, same thing with employees, but so when you're hiring, it's also best practice. But with founders, the way I think about it is you don't know what's going to happen in the future, and you want to make sure that the founders are committed to the business. And I've seen situations where founders didn't have vesting on their shares, and you have a founder who maybe was working on the business for 6 months, but then something came up in their personal life, and they decided I can't work on this business anymore. I gotta go get a more stable job, or I gotta go deal with the family situation. In that situation, if they leave after 6 months and they keep all their shares, it's not ideal. Investors aren't going to like that, and the other founder is not going to like that. So if you have vesting, it helps protect against situations like that. And so for the same reason with employees, you want employees invested in the business, and you want them working towards earning kind of the equity they get in the business. So as far as when you're hiring, you generally want to offer folks a mix of cash and equity, and on that equity, you want to have what we call a standard 4-year vest, which is a 1-year cliff. It means you don't earn any of your equity for 1 year, and then once you hit that 1 year, you earn a quarter of your equity, and after that, you vest monthly. There's a lot of good reasons for that, but the primary one is just to align the goals of the company and the employee, and have the employee motivated towards kind of the company growing and being worth more as it grows. As far as best practices for hiring and attracting top talents, I don't know if I have a lot of super valuable insights. I'm not a recruiter or an HR person. Those are probably your best people to reach out to for something like that. I think where I try to add value is keeping my clients in line with kind of what the market norm is. So that's like we talked about, making sure that employees get equity, keeping that equity on a market vesting schedule. And then, I can advise, because I see a lot of startups, so I can give people feedback on reasonable benefits packages, health insurance, that type of thing. But generally, you want to make sure you're meeting the market standard, and then if you're really looking to kind of set yourself apart, you can add perks and other things on top of that. I think you had asked about letting people go as well, or departing with folks. That's a place where I can add some value, because that's a tricky situation, and one you want to make sure you navigate appropriately. Generally, if we're talking about U.S.-based companies, which is the world I represent, generally employment is at will for people. And what that means is you can let someone go for any reason. They have no guarantee of employment tomorrow. If I just I'm the boss and I decide someone shouldn't work at my company tomorrow, I can terminate them, and I don't have to have had a reason to do that, as long as, with one caveat being as long as it's not an illegal reason. So there's a few things you can't terminate someone for. So that's things like, for their gender, or for their age, or for their religion or their sexual orientation, things like that. You can't terminate someone for a reason like that, or you can't terminate someone in a retaliation type thing. So if someone raises a flag at the company and says like, hey, I found out we're cooking the books, and then you fire them because of that, that's also not okay. But so when you are thinking about terminating someone, because you do have to worry about someone maybe claiming retaliation or claiming that you're terminating them for some discriminatory reason, it is advisable to like build a record over time. So that's and try to document that record. So generally, you're not going to terminate someone the day after you find out they aren't performing up to snuff. It's kind of something that happens over time. So like, talk to that person, let them know that where they're kind of missing expectations, and then like take notes after that meeting, maybe send a follow-up email so you have this like written record, and ideally a record that's got some time to it. Maybe that's 3 or 6 months or some kind of time period. Unless it's something like really egregious, like that you caught them stealing money, then yeah, terminate them that day. But if it's like, performance issues, like build up a record, give them a chance to improve, and document that record. And then when you do if you do need to terminate that person, you're in a better position to defend against them claiming some type of, illegal action on your part, because like I said, if someone's just performing badly, you're completely entitled to terminate them. And one other quick point I'd say is, when you are terminating someone and you're actually kind of having that meeting in person, or maybe it's over Zoom, if your organization's big enough and you have like an HR person or another member of the team, maybe it's their manager, their direct manager, if you can have them join the meeting as well, or have like 2 people in that meeting, it generally puts you in a better position. If one person doing the talking and then one person maybe taking notes and kind of recording what happened, again, it just sets you up to better protect against any claims by that employee might try to make. Because people get fired, they're often emotionally distraught about that, and they might be inclined to want to sue the company or hire a lawyer and send some nasty letters. So the better you're set up to defend against something like that, it's ideal.
Couldn't agree more to on that. That's some good points. We spoke a little bit about termination. Let's kind of switch gears a little bit and talking about onboarding, and really more of the solidifying of their position from a legal perspective. So this kind of translates to more of the offer letter, right? So the thrill of landing a new hire can quickly be overshadowed by the legalities of onboarding, right? That's where the offer letter comes in, and it's more than just a piece of paper with the salary figure. It's actually a well-crafted offer letter, and it sets the clear expectations for both you and the new employee, outlining everything from compensation to benefits to confidentiality agreements. But what exactly goes into this crucial document? So the question is, beyond the salary and the start date, what key components should a strong offer letter include to ensure a smooth and successful onboarding experience for both the new hire and the company?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's not a ton of magic that goes into an offer letter. I mean, I think you want to be clear. You want to make sure it's clear as to what their position is, who they're reporting to, what their start date is. But then especially on compensation, you want to make sure it's clear, like what the salary is, if there's any bonus, what the bonus is, like what the terms of getting that bonus are. Often you want to build in like a caveat of like, subject to board approval or something like that. One area I see companies fumble a decent amount is on the equity piece. So I think you want to make sure the equity component in an offer, if there is one, is very clear. And so things to look out for is don't promise a percentage of ownership. The issue with promising a percentage of ownership is that there's different ways to calculate what that percentage means. You could calculate based on outstanding shares. You could calculate based on outstanding shares plus options outstanding. You calculate those two plus reserved option pool. So it's not, if you use a percentage, it's not clear what that means, and it's also a moving target over time. So I always suggest, because I've seen that create issues in a lot of cases where you promise a percentage. I always suggest, like, if you're talking percentages, figure out what that is, but then in the offer letter, put an actual fixed number of shares. So if you've got 10 million fully diluted shares and you're promising someone 1%, in the offer letter you put 100,000 shares. You don't say 1%, and that just avoids any potential kind of misunderstanding. And then the other, I think you kind of mentioned this, but the other super important thing is what's called a CIIA, or sometimes a PIIA, which is like a confidentiality and invention assignment agreement. And that's super important for diligence purposes whenever you do an investment round or when you get acquired. That's going to be one of the top things an investor wants to see, is because what that document contains is an agreement for that employee to sign all IP that they work on while at the company, that they sign it over to the company, and then also to keep any confidential information that they learn confidential. So investors are really honed in on making sure a company owns its IP, and they're gonna want to make sure that every single employee that you hire has signed one of these agreements. And I've seen it many times where companies have not been diligent about getting those employees to sign those, and it just creates this backlog when you're doing a financing round. Sometimes it gets delayed by a week or two because the investor is like, well, I want people to sign these, so go get folks to sign them. And sometimes those people don't even work at the company anymore, so you're having to go chase them, and maybe they're pissed off because you fired them. So get them signed on day one, and it'll avoid you a lot of headache in the future, or could potentially avoid you a lot of headache.
Right. Great points. Let's move on to talking about counsel for a second. I think that's important. Obviously, there's so many different aspects of legal for startup, and having the right counsel is really the right one. So imagine your startup as a complex recipe, right? There's full of delicious potential, but requiring the right ingredients and cooking techniques to truly shine is really, really important. So founders bring the initial vision and passion, but sometimes a little extra expertise can also elevate their startup to the next level. This is where advisors and consultants come in, seasonal professions who have valuable guidance and specialized knowledge. But however, navigating this landscape can actually be really tricky, because how do you really know how to find the right person and ensure that their expertise truly benefits your company? So the question is really, how can you identify and leverage the experience of consultants and advisors to create a powerful brain trust that really propels your startup recipe towards success?
Sure. Yeah, another really good question. On the legal front, I'd say when you're hiring a lawyer, make sure you're hiring a lawyer who works with startups. Like I've kind of alluded to in a bunch of the questions you've asked, there's a very specific way to set up a company in order to optimize it for taking money from VCs, and the VCs are very used to seeing companies set up in a certain way. And if you don't have a lawyer who knows or isn't familiar with representing companies in this world, there's a lot of mistakes they can make and a lot of things that they do that you'll end up having to clean up down the road. So like hire a good lawyer who's familiar with representing startups in the VC world. With respect to other advisors, it's similar advice, and consultants. I mean, I guess I can talk about kind of what's the difference between an advisor and consultant. Advisor is generally someone who's not working on like specific projects or tasks for the company. They're someone who you can call, maybe have kind of monthly meetings with, and you just ask questions to. They're going to give you feedback on how to, depending on what area they have expertise on, but maybe it's a marketing advisor, or maybe it's someone who knows how to go to market. Anyways, they're typically compensated only with equity, advisors, although sometimes cash, but not typically. And then a consultant is someone more who you hire to perform specific tasks or create specific work product for the company. And that's maybe one project or multiple projects, and that's usually over like a set period of time. Maybe you hire them for 3 months or 6 months or a year, distinct from an employee who you'd hire indefinitely. But as far as finding good ones and appropriate ones, I think it's just tapping that network. trying to reach out to folks who are in the space that you're in, letting them know what you're up to, just getting to know people. And as you do that, people are often keen to want to help or want to be involved. They like, especially people who are in the startup world, they like being part of building things. That's why they're part of the startup world. And even though they're maybe working on their own thing, doesn't mean they don't want to help other people work on their things. Because they're passionate about building, they're passionate about, and their idea making the world a better place. And so, yeah, meet people, get to know people, network in your space, and I think you'll find folks who want to advise and want to help you out.
Adam, thank you so much for your incredible insights that you've shared in our podcast. Is there anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, thanks, Abraham. Really appreciated taking the time with me here. I'm passionate about helping startups. So if you're, it's what I do. It's what I kind of eat, sleep, and breathe. So if you're a founder, got a company going, or thinking about starting a company, reach out. You can get me at adam@siliconlegal.com, or you can find me on the Silicon Legal website or on LinkedIn. And happy to take a call, free of charge, and just talk startups and help you with what you're up to. I love helping founders. So thanks again, Abraham.
Thank you for really joining us today on our episode, and we hope that you gained valuable insights into choosing the right legal structure and location, to building a stellar team, crafting clear offer letters, and leveraging advisors. A special thank you to our guest, Adam Derry, for sharing his expertise and shedding light onto these essential topics. If you want to learn more about Adam and the incredible work that he's doing at Silicon Legal, be sure to check out their website and social media in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more expert advice and startup stories. Until next time.